Story 1. Technically, no. He is already remarried with a child and owns a store at my age. I am unmarried, childless, and unemployed. Story 2. Not at all. My dad raised a family and owned a house in his late 20s on a single income with only a high school diploma. I have military service, a college degree, and technical experience, along with a top-secret clearance. However, I can't find a job that pays enough to afford a house or support a family, and I have no one. I can't blame anyone but myself, I suppose. Story 3. I'm definitely more wealthy, but he had everything I can't buy with money. I'd say he was better mentally. Story 4. Yes, because I do not smoke, I do not drink, I do not sit all day, and I do not take my frustrations out on my family. At the same time, I did not serve in a war, and I did not have a career in law enforcement. Those two experiences significantly changed my dad. It is easier to forgive him than to stay angry. Story 5. Oh no. My dad was retired with a six-figure pension. I will never be able to afford to retire due to various reasons in my life. Story 6. I think it's difficult to compare given our different starting points. My dad came over from Mexico when he was 12 and worked in the fields picking crops. By the time he was my age, he was working as a teacher with a wife and kids. I grew up here in the United States and now work in education at a community college. I also have a wife who works and two kids. My kids are growing up much better off than I was when I was a child, but that is due to my dad's hard work and the fact that my wife is not a stay-at-home mom. So I don't really know. Story 7. No, not at all. When my dad was 57, he had been happily married for 27 years. I was married for only 24 years before I caught her cheating, and the divorce ended my farming and trucking businesses. Story 8. No, back in his day, he would have had no experience on a job, and they would still hire him because back then, you didn't need a document to prove you could do something. Story 9. Probably not. He was already married and had a house and a child by my age. I have never wanted children, so that aspect is not relevant, but I am 34 and have never been in a serious, committed relationship, so by that standard, I am behind. Economically, it is probably more difficult to assess. Story 10. Not even close. My dad was married with two kids, a nice two-story house with a pool, and 3 cars by the time he was my age. I have more hair, though, so that's a plus. Story 11. Hell no. My dad went off to fight in World War II at 17, returned, and retired after a 30-year career in law enforcement. He then worked as a private contractor for the Department of Defense. He wasn't wealthy, but by 60, everything he owned was paid off, including a vacation home on a lake, and he was debt-free. I'm 62 and expecting to have to work for 2 years after I'm gone. Story 12. No, probably not. Dad had a college degree and started a career relatively recently compared to my age, and he is still working. He didn't seem to make any major mistakes like I did, except maybe wanting a second child. Generally speaking, he set a high bar that neither of his sons has exceeded at our age. I don't know how my older brother feels about it, but at some point, I had to stop thinking that I was a disappointment or didn't live up to an expectation, or else I'd be more miserable than I can be at times. He's a good guy, just reserved and emotionally distant, so I haven't seen much of his relaxed, happy side. But now that I'm older, I understand why he's like that. Life is tough out here. Story 13. I haven't laid my hands on a single woman. I also haven't harmed any of my students in the bathroom, partly because I'm not a teacher. Story 14. I have a strong marriage, a wonderful child, own a house, and am investing for retirement and the future. At my age, he was working odd jobs and experienced a quick marriage failure shortly after starting. Ultimately, my success is due to him laying the groundwork for me. Story 15. My dad at my age, second marriage, for children, no job, regular drug user, rented home, relied solely on my mother for income. Me, married once and still am. One child, homeowner, secure career in a professional organization, never touched drugs. Essentially, as a child, I saw how ineffective my dad was and vowed to never be like him. I haven't seen him since 1999 and do not intend to again. Story 16. Absolutely not. My parents committed to the idea of till death do us part. My parents and I graduated high school the same year. They obtained their general educational development certificates a month before I graduated high school in 1981. When they retired, my mother was 57 and my father was 58. They bought a conversion van and traveled extensively throughout the continental United States. My father had a fully funded pension from General Motors that my mother still receives years after his death. They returned to work several years later out of boredom for maybe 4 or 5 years. I, on the other hand, am 62 with one divorce and no pension. I do have a 401k that was cut in half due to the divorce. I am not a homeowner. They were and still are. I have no idea when I will retire. I have a feeling it won't be my choice due to automation and artificial intelligence. I'm just trying to hang on to the bitter end of my career before everything is taken away from me. What a great way to live. Story 17. Having daily warm food and a supermarket filled with fresh produce is much better than when I was his age. Story 18. I had a drinking problem for 2 years, but I forced myself to stop almost completely. I will enjoy a single drink every once in a while, but I'm not a fan of it anymore. So yes, I'm doing better than him. He let his drinking ruin his life, while I refused to live a difficult life. Story 19. He was in a long-term relationship with my mom by the time he was in college. I am currently in college and have not had a relationship yet. That is the biggest difference in terms of success. Story 20. He lives in a bus in the Arizona desert. I am in an air-conditioned house in a nice neighborhood in Colorado. Much better, I would say. The hippie culture of tuning in and dropping out never works. Story 21. No, he already had 2 of my sisters, with the third on the way, and was married, owned his own business, and I'm sure also a house at this point. I'm in an 8-year relationship that is somewhat crumbling, have crippling self-doubt and depression, and no friends. Story 22. It depends on what you mean by better. In terms of family, at my age, he had a 13-year-old son and a sister. In terms of building a family, I am not doing better. I have never been married, and I have no children. Story 23. When it comes to finances, I am comparable to him at the same age. However, if we had grown up in similar life situations, I believe he would surpass me. Otherwise, we might be similar. My dad was definitely stronger than me at that age. Story 24. At this point, my dad was significantly affected by the housing market. He sold everything before the crash but made poor choices with the money. He purchased 2 worthless pieces of land where he couldn't build and took out loans that were not repaid. On top of that, he lost his job as a laborer because no one in construction was working. Story 25. Nope, not even close. It's too late to improve on it unless I get very lucky and win the lottery or something similar. Story 26. Nope. My dad was already married with 3 kids, had a great paying job, a house, and 2 cars when he was my age. I'm still single, can barely afford rent with 2 roommates, and have a low-paying job. To make it worse, he told me that I'm not doing as well as he was at my age. Story 27. No, he was on his second house. I will never be able to afford my first, despite making more than him when he retired. Story 28. I don't feel that it would be a fair comparison since we did not have the same opportunities and support systems growing. Story 29. My dad was recently out of the Navy after Vietnam, around 20 years old. He left home and traveled cross-country from the east to the west coast. He was homeless for a while putting himself through school, literally digging through the trash for food and selling his plasma. The money he received from selling plasma went to buying a loaf of bread and peanut butter, and then he would buy a large bag of oranges from a Hispanic fruit vendor. He met my mom when he was about 40. Honestly, this puts things into perspective. He truly made our lives much better than his own. I never really thought about it like that until now. He passed away right before Thanksgiving, just before the pandemic. Story 30. He was happily married with 2 children, a bachelor's degree, and had just bought a house. I am still in college without those accomplishments. Story 31. Yes, I am, actually. I don't have 3 felonies. I just bought a house, have 4 kids, and a stay-at-home wife. The refrigerator is full and the bills are paid. Not too bad in this economy. Story 32. In some ways, yes. In others, no. He was married at my age, but he also never finished high school. I think he only went as far as either elementary or middle school. I got my diploma and couldn't finish a degree but managed to complete a few classes before I dropped out. I guess I surpassed him in education, but he was married at my age, while I have never even kissed a girl. Story 33. Financially and socially, yes. I earn significantly more than he did at my age, and I have more friends. However, he had someone and I am single. I have no divorces or children, so I believe I am doing well. I would definitely prefer my situation. Story 34. Financially, I am much better off. However, my parents have been married for over 50 years, while I am divorced. My dad has a much stronger social circle and hobbies that he loves, whereas I do not have much beyond my career. I would definitely prefer to be in his position. Story 35. I was born when my dad was 29, which is also my current age. By then, he had been married for over a year, held a college degree, had a decent job, and was renting a home. I currently have none of those things. I suppose they say comparison is the thief of joy for a reason. Story 36. No, unfortunately, he had a family. I do not have children. It is a choice. I do not know. He earned a little more money than I do, but he worked very hard to provide, so it is difficult to compare. Story 37. I have 2 children now, although my first marriage didn't work out so well. Another child is expected a year later. Additionally, my mother and my partner recently purchased a house. My mother was also able to be a stay-at-home mom after my sister and I entered elementary school. Story 38. Not by a long shot, but I have no one to blame but myself. I am 45 years old. At that age, my dad had been married to my mom for 23 years, had 2 boys. I was 18, my brother was 12, and had been working at the same company for a little over a decade designing medical equipment. At 45, I am single, having had my first girlfriend just last year, have no children, and am working in retail. Story 39. Close, but not quite. I'm in the same industry as he was, but I'm not married yet. Hopefully that will change soon. Story 40. In some ways, yes, but in many other ways, no. At 42, my father was married to my mother, his second wife. He had 2 other daughters from his first marriage and had a much better paying job. I do not have children or a spouse, and at the rate I am going, I will probably never have either. Story 41. I am happily married with 1 child and another on the way. I have a decent job with good benefits. I rent a modest place with my wife, but it is in a safe neighborhood and close to work and leisure. He was divorced and recently remarried at my age and is working through some anger issues. He has a good job, but it involves very hard work. He has also been a homeowner since I was a baby. Story 42. Define better. I didn't make as much money as he did. I chose a different path. However, I have a happy marriage, 3 wonderful children, and a supportive community around me, and I feel content. So I believe I am doing better, even if I earn half as much. Story 43. I earn more than he does, but he was able to afford a house on a lower salary, while I cannot buy a house now. It doesn't feel like I am doing better. Story 44. Good question. I understand my father now that I'm almost 30. Sometimes you just end up being a regular person, and that's okay. Story 45. Health, wealth, and quality time-wise. I am 53 and have been retired for over 8 years. My son runs the construction company. My father was still working at 53 and had many dreams of traveling that he never got to realize. I was determined to learn from his life and had planned long ago to succeed in early retirement, giving me the ability to pursue my 2 greatest passions, traveling and surfing. I have surfed at every spot around the world that I dreamed of. My father was a handsome man who succumbed to his weakness for women. I was blessed with my father's good looks, and as a young man, I followed in his footsteps. However, I chose to change my path and live a more stable family life. I have been happily married for over 13 years. In my personal life, I have learned a lot from my father as well. Story 46. I worked very hard to achieve my goals. I love him and he did what he could, but he didn't finish high school, so his opportunities were limited. He doesn't even have a bank account and recently bought his first house at 60 using his inheritance after his mother passed away. In contrast, I bought my first house at 24 and just accepted a job that pays six figures at 37. I am focused on building a life for my three daughters that my father was unable to provide. Story 47. Yes and no. He graduated college with a bachelor's degree in physical therapy and was making good money already. Back then, all you needed was a bachelor's degree. Now, you basically need a doctor of philosophy for it. He just retired on September 1st after 40 years in the field. He was grandfathered into everything. He worked with 20-year-old medical doctors. They kept trying to promote him to an administrative role, but he wanted to keep working with people. He's a people person. I'm 33, almost 34. He was 33 when he had me, 32 when he had my older sister, and 31 when he had my eldest sibling. I was 24 when I had my eldest child. The only thing I have going for me is that I married and had children sooner. I did have a well-paying job at 29 when I had children and was married, and I would say I was doing better than he was at that age. I lost that job, so while I may be more advanced in my personal life, I am far less successful professionally. Story 48. My dad passed away when I was 2. I have lived more years than he did, and I have been able to watch my own children grow. My eldest is a teenager now, and she is amazing. My son is a spitting image of me at his age, and he is a wonderful little boy. I do not have someone special in my life, but everything else is going wonderfully. Story 49. Yes and no. At 35, he was married with a house and a child. I do not have any of those things. On the other hand, he was married to my mother, which I would not wish on my worst enemy. Overall, I am doing much better. Story 50. He struggled to hold down jobs and had 2 estranged daughters that I discovered after going through his belongings after his death. Although he possessed skills, he was financially struggling and unable to manage his life due to mental illness and schizophrenia. He was in an abusive relationship with my mother when my sister and I were very young. I am now doing significantly better than he could have ever imagined. Story 51. Not financially, but I am pretty sure that around that age, he was beating my mother and screaming at her. Luckily, I missed most of it, but my brother didn't. He was an abusive person who would only parent when he felt like it and was unbelievably cheap. I hold a lot of resentment over this, but I don't think he would actually admit to any of it, and I'm not sure if confronting him would help at this point. He has softened a fair bit over the years and matured somewhat, but he is a perfect example of someone who wasn't ready for a child when he had one. Story 52. My dad was married with 2 children and owned a house. I have never been in a committed, exclusive relationship. I live in an apartment and have no idea if I am even able to have children. Story 53. Yes, I have not been to jail or a secure psychiatric unit, only to visit him. I have 1 child and I also have a job. He never worked unless you count drug dealing. Story 54. The older I get, the more I realize how great my dad is. I have tried to do some of the things I thought he could do better, and as my family has grown, it has made me reflect on how much he sacrificed to give me a wonderful life. I often think about how he was a great father, so I try to call him each day and let him know. I believe he was better at certain things and I am better at others. However, my dad and I are still close, so I would say he has me by a little with more experience. Story 55. Financially, no, but emotionally, yes. I give him a lot of credit. He has grown significantly as a grandfather. I believe he has learned a great deal from my brother and me. My grandfather grew up during the Great Depression and came of age witnessing heavy combat during World War II, so it is understandable. Story 56. Honestly, it is mixed. It is better in some ways, quite similar in many aspects, and worse in others. We have both faced different challenges, and I believe we have done as well as we could with the lives we created and the circumstances we endured. This means there have been many shortcomings and failures, but that is part of life. We all need grace and forgiveness, and that becomes clearer as I grow older. Story 57. I mean, yes, but it made him a much better person than my life will make me if I keep going this way. Story 58. Definitely. He would probably say so himself too. I love that man, but he has been financially irresponsible my entire life. At 34, he was divorced from my mom and in a tough spot, but he really did show up for us. He did what he could with what he knew. Story 59. It depends. When my late father was 36, he married my mother 2 years earlier and had my older brother a year later. I'm not sure how they were doing financially, but he was leaving the Navy at that time after 8 years of service. I am currently 36, have my degree, and a decent career. I have been in the National Guard for 19 years, living with family, but I am single. I would like to find love and start a family. Story 60. In terms of career and relationships, absolutely not. In terms of maturity and life satisfaction, I believe I am. Story 61. Depends on what you mean by better. I am a senior level engineer and single. He just finished law school and was planning a wedding. Story 62. I would say it is similar, maybe slightly worse off. If you are doing better than your baby boomer parents, then you have it a lot better, especially in this era of inflation and stagnant wages. Story 63. Yes, but it was the first generation, so it was almost guaranteed that I would do better. It is definitely a blessing, and I know I should be doing much better. Story 64. Yes, much better. We have a similar job, different trades, but still in construction. However, when he was 25, he was well on his way to becoming a full-time alcoholic, which eventually led to his death 18 years after I was born. Story 65. Yes and no. At 27, my dad was a firefighter, and I am trying to build a career. However, I developed a chronic illness as a young adult, so I am playing catch-up a bit. My dad also had major anger issues and mental health problems at 27. I experience depression sometimes, but I don't lash out at others like my dad, at least. Story 66. Considering he was conscripted into the Red Army and was about to be sent to Afghanistan, I am doing pretty well. Story 67. He was physically abusive towards me and the rest of the family at that time. My children love me and have no fear of me. So, despite his marriage and home ownership, I still believe I am doing better. Story 68. No, he was at the highest position in his field. He had a loving wife and 4 sons. Salaries are comparable, but with inflation, I am sure he would be earning double what he made in his current role. Story 69. Yes and no. I have a higher education and a higher paying job than he did at this age, but I'm also in significantly more debt than he is, so it leans more toward no. Story 70. My dad cheated on my mom. We were a family of 3 sons and ranchers. He married into a prominent family and was a distinguished engineer. He broke my mom's heart multiple times. Us boys were in middle school and did not understand my mom's depression and alcohol abuse until a couple of her friends approached me, the oldest, and had a sit-down chat. My mom eventually passed away due to illness. From that point on, he lived with the guilt of what he had done and admitted it to me several weeks before he himself passed. I am doing much better than my dad ever did in his entire life of infidelity, with a loving wife and ranching partner of 36 years and 2 fine adult daughters, which is worth more than any amount of money. Story 71. In some aspects, yes, in others, no. When my dad was my age, he didn't have a career or a college degree, but he did have 4-year-old me and my 3-year-old sister, along with divorce papers from my parents splitting. I have my degree and my dream career. I have no wife, current or past, and no kids. I feel lucky to have found my career quickly after college, but I can't help feeling a little behind when it comes to family matters. Story 72. The individual had just been released from jail and decided that a methamphetamine addiction was a great addition to his life. Story 73. When my dad was 25, he was married, had a girlfriend, and at least one side relationship, along with a car and a high-paying job, all while learning English in an English-speaking country. In the end, he left the girlfriend and side relationships, and his wife became my mom. They are still married 50 years later. I simply cannot compete. Story 74. I am 53 years old and thank my father every day for the sacrifices he made for us. He only attended the 2nd grade in a developing country, so I am doing better. However, he is a bigger man than I will ever be. Story 75. No, he was already making over $100,000, had investment properties, and was married with kids. I have more integrity and a better character, but that doesn't pay the bills or provide value, so who cares? Story 76. My father physically and emotionally abused me while I was growing up and had 2 children by the time he was 26, which is my age now. I do not mistreat my children. Instead, I cherish them and give them all the love I can. I also teach them how to communicate without anger and aggression. So I'd say I'm doing all right. Story 77. At this point, my dad was struggling with meth addiction, chronically unemployed, and unfaithful to my mom. I am doing much better than he is, but admittedly, the standard is quite low. Story 78. He has given me valuable advice on how to avoid some of his mistakes and provided me with a much better childhood than he experienced. Story 79. I honestly don't know. However, I haven't accidentally fathered any children and then abandoned the mother, so I have that going for me, which is nice. Story 80. My dad was an executive at the company where he worked and owned our home. However, at around my age, he and my mom left virtually everything behind, packed up, and immigrated to a new country to give me, their only child, a better life. That's not to say our life wouldn't have been good. Realistically, I would have been fine there because of nepotism, as my dad's company is one of the largest in our home country. I am eternally grateful for the life and agency they provided me, but I don't have the courage to do what they did. I also rarely saw my dad growing up. He left before I woke up and frequently returned after my bedtime. He typically worked on weekends as well. I have good hours at my job, so I see my kids every day and on weekends. In some regards, I don't think I'm doing better, but in others, I would say yes. Story 81. According to the Bank of Canada inflation calculator, I earn more than 50% more, adjusted for inflation, than my father did when he retired at 60. At 62, he had been retired for 2 years. At 62, I am still working and hopefully have a few years left. He sold his house for around $200,000 in today's money. My share of our investment-grade property is worth more than 10 times that, and I have other assets. So the answer is yes, I am doing better than my father did at my age. Story 82. He had a house, a few friends, a wife, and a child while working as a construction laborer in 1975 at the age of 24. He was apparently an alcoholic, though. I have a full-time job, a side job, and a car. Story 83. No, at my age my dad was in his second house, a nice one with his 5th child on the way. I am better educated and have been consistently employed since I was 14. I live comfortably and can provide for my one child, but I cannot afford a house where I live. I could afford a decent house in most parts of the country, though the same house he bought at my age has increased in price by about 7 times, while wages have remained stagnant. Story 84. Financially, I am better off. I own a house and have a good job at a prestigious company. However, I am also a 40-year-old widower, while my father was married with 2 children at my age, so it's a mixed bag. Story 85. Life quality and time with my kids. Yes. Financially, no. But that's not surprising. His private firm, which he built and fully owns without any debt, has generated 400 million euros by now. Story 86. Hard to define better. My dad had a wife and raised 4 children on a single income. I have a wife and we have 2 children and we both work. However, if you compare our financial worth to what my dad was worth, then yes, we are significantly better off, likely 10 times better. Story 87. I believe so. I make more money than he does to this day. When my dad was my age, my family lived in a room at my grandma's house. My parents like to think I'm doing poorly, though, and praise my sister who works at Nike and makes $6,000 a month, while my income is 5 times that. I have multiple impressive cars, my own house, and my daughter attends private school. I have shared custody of my daughter, whom I fought for in court. Yet, I am viewed negatively because I had a child outside of marriage. My mom is constantly worried about me and my future. Story 88. He had a full-time job, a new wife after abandoning me and my mom, and was living in a house he possibly paid for in the city. Story 89. Sadly, my dad passed away early and never lived to my age. I used his life as a cautionary tale of what not to do growing up. As a result, I have accomplished far more in my life. I wish he had made different decisions. He would have accomplished more, been happier, and maybe still be with me today. I miss you, Dad. Story 90. No, my wife passed away earlier, and I still have children under 18. Pay-wise is somewhat better. I do not own a house and may be homeless in 45 days. Story 91. Better? It depends on your metrics. My dad worked as a lifeguard until his 30s, got married at 40, and had his first child in his mid-40s. I got married at 22, had my first child at 23, obtained my master's degree at 27, and started earning six figures early in my 30s. However, I am obese and somewhat miserable in my early 40s. Unless I change some things, it seems likely I will either die or at least experience a serious cardiac event between the ages of 55 and 65. My dad, on the other hand, was quite active until his mid-80s and has only started to decline significantly in the last couple of years. Story 92. My dad was forced to retire, got divorced, and then had a stroke all within 4 months when he was 52. I'm 48, so ask me in 4 years. But for now, I don't really know. My dad loved his job as a fireman and spent all his free time doing various activities, whether it was side jobs, coaching baseball, softball, or football, or just working around the house. I have to set limits on my phone so I won't just stare at it all day. I can't seem to find a passion in life. However, I have a nicer house than he ever had, and I'm in a better marriage than he ever had. My kids may not be as good looking or smart as his, but he was such a happy guy for the most part. In the last 16 years of his life, he had a stroke that permanently affected his right hand and speech. Cataracts nearly blinded him, he was almost deaf, and he lost one leg due to poor circulation 2 years ago. He lost the second leg 6 weeks before he passed. But despite that, he was smiling and laughing almost the whole time. When writing a eulogy, it occurred to me that I didn't really ever remember him speaking ill of anyone, even his 2 ex-wives. The outpouring of love after his death was overwhelming. Meanwhile, I don't think I have a single person in my life, other than my wife, that I'd consider a close friend. Probably not for 18 years now, so I guess he wins. Story 93. My father had a wife, a house with a pool, and 2 children in elementary school, as well as a brand new Toyota Tundra. He also migrated to the United States and did not have a high school or college degree. This was during the 2000 recession, but he was unaffected. I am nowhere near that. Story 94. I have essentially replicated his life with small improvements. He was never interested in sports and didn't prioritize his health, leading a very sedentary lifestyle. I train every day and maintain a healthy diet. Aside from that, I follow his path. While it is not a luxurious lifestyle, my family lives debt-free and stress-free with modest expectations. Story 95. I make more money and haven't been divorced yet, but he at least owned a house, had been married, and had a child. Story 96. Absolutely not. At 21, he was at university studying, partying, and drinking with friends in a downtown apartment he shared with others. At 21, I am working hard at a minimum wage job at a pet crematory, making little progress in school due to failing numerous community college classes from juggling work and caring for my mother. While I appreciate his tremendous help, I am also trying to save up for a motorcycle and slowly lose weight. I understand it's a struggle, but it truly is a challenge. Story 97. I am 46 years old and have not had a heart attack. I believe he was 41 when he experienced his first. I am not the healthiest person, but I recognize what vegetables are and enjoy most of them. I also exercise. In fairness to him, he was a small business owner and worked a lot. He made my sister and me promise to never own a retail business. I am in my first marriage, which has lasted 18 years so far, while he managed about 6 or maybe 8 years. His second marriage has lasted around 38 years. I will likely be able to retire comfortably without facing poverty. He made poor financial decisions, often trying to minimize his tax burden, which ultimately reduced his Social Security benefits. I see him as a cautionary tale about the importance of saving. Story 98. On paper, I guess not. He was married with 3 children and had a house. Currently, though, he is broke and living with whatever family will take him and his kids, and my mom won't talk to him. So, winner me, I guess. Story 99. At my age, my dad was financially better off than I am. He had a doctorate, an executive position, 3 children, a house, and an unhappy marriage. I also have a doctorate and work in academia, so the pay is low. I have 1 child, live in an apartment, and I am a widower. I have a better work-life balance, and even though life has not been very kind, I've made changes to improve my situation. I guess my dad never sought therapy to deal with his challenges. He died 2 weeks ago. I miss him a lot. Story 100. At my age, my dad had 3 children, a house, a wife, and a decent job. Now, I make more money than he does but can't afford any of those things and live with him. This economy is challenging. Story 101. The whole life experience can be challenging. Unfortunately, my dad is a good example of how not to spend one's life, as all his poor decisions have quickly caught up to him. Now I basically support him, which I don't mind. Despite his mistakes, he was a loving father. I just wish he had been able to get his life together. But he never has. Story 102. Yes, I am 30 now. We both lived in San Diego at my age. However, he had a lot of problems with cocaine, cannabis, being a social outcast, and working at Radio Shack. It was the 1980s, fast and fun times for all but troublesome for the addicts. He is a smart guy. He just had many issues with narcissistic personality disorder, obsessive-compulsive disorder, borderline autism, drugs, and a spoiled, unstable home life growing up. I have a STEM degree, a well-paying job, a girlfriend, an active social life, more empathy, and over $20,000 in my bank account. I still have some traits of autism and OCD, but I vowed to never try anything beyond cannabis and alcohol. I even eliminated alcohol a few years ago to improve myself because I knew it was holding me back. My family and I stopped talking 10 years ago. They took me in at that time to recover and grow from all the chaos. I was 20 and just needed a fair chance at life. I guess when you grow up in an unstable environment, you either become the same or radically different. Thank you to Al-Anon, therapy, and my extended family. Story 103. What is better? Financially, yes. Stress and emotionally? No. Overall happiness? I don't know, he wouldn't open up. Story 104. I am not obese and eating myself to death like he was. He is still alive but now morbidly obese. Story 105. No, he was married and traveling for work abroad. He had a car and a house. I am newly married with no children, struggling in a foreign land in a good job role. Times have changed. I feel our parents had it much better, with less stress and no tension about anything. Story 106. Yes, in some ways, I am much better than my father was at my age. I graduated from a top university and I have better health, fitness, and communication skills. Although I am currently jobless, I am confident that once I get a job, I will earn 3 times more than my father did. However, I am not as good a person as he was. He was so kind at my age that people often say I do not have the same good-hearted nature. My father was polite, calm, quiet, and respectful to everyone. I do not mean that I do not respect people. I do, but if something is wrong, I address it directly in the moment. In that sense, I am not like him. Story 107. Probably yes, but only because my parents gave me large sums of money to help me get a leg up. If I were doing this entirely on my own like they had to, then no, I am way behind where they were. Story 108. He has had problems with alcohol his whole life. I'm currently not doing too great, but definitely better than him. Story 109. Financially, no, he had a house. Mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, absolutely. My father was old-school Catholic. The child should be seen and not heard. Spare the rod and spoil the child. He was beaten severely as a child and believed his children should suffer the same fate. We all endured daily verbal abuse and belittlement, along with weekly beatings. Being the eldest son, I bore the brunt of it. Even 30 years after leaving home, I still carry significant trauma from my upbringing. I don't think I'll ever fully overcome it, but I have been able to raise my own children free of abuse, judgment, and particularly the trauma I had to endure. I am by no means a perfect father, but I have managed to break the cycle. For that, I am infinitely better than my father ever was at any age. Story 110. It depends on how you define better. I earn more money and have a nicer house, but he has a wife and 2 kids, while I have an ex-wife and a girlfriend who came after my wife became an ex. Just to clarify. Story 111. He had already met my mom at this point and was planning on coming to the United States. I am currently in college. Story 112. I'm doing better financially and have improved my relationships with my family. My dad was light years ahead of me in empathy. He didn't mind halting his own financial development to help those less fortunate than he was, and our family was by no means rich. I believe we have developed in different directions. I do not feel that I'm better than he was, not at all. I'm just grateful that he passed some of that empathy along. I lost him 1.5 years ago, and I miss him dearly. Story 113. My dad drank himself to death by the time he was my age and was a terrible father. I take pride in being the best dad I can be, and I am here. Story 114. What a strange question. Since when is life something to win at? Whether my dad was a happier man at my age is a more important question for me. I do not know the answer to that. You would have to ask him. Story 115. When my dad was my age, he was employed, married with 2 kids, and owned a house and a couple of dogs. I live in my best friend's unfinished basement. I am unmarried and childless, but I work full-time and I am in graduate school. Story 116. I'm still alive, so yes. My dad was a chain smoker and died of heart failure when he was 67. I am now 68. I do not smoke, drink, or use drugs. My dangerous habit is riding a motorcycle too fast. Story 117. Not even close. He was out there inventing revolutionary medical device technology that is now the basis for nearly all of those types of products today worldwide. There is no living up to that. By the way, he is also the humblest and most generous person you would ever meet. My dad is my hero. Story 118. Definitely. He had already been dead for 4 years due to AIDS and alcohol abuse by the time he got this far in life. Story 119. Yes, by a large margin. I have been married for 25 years, while he has been divorced twice. I raise my children, whereas he lets his wives take care of the children. I own my home while he pays rent. I have not needed financial support since I was 16, while he struggles to make ends meet and relies on my brother and me for support. I speak 5 languages while he speaks 1. I have traveled to 40 countries, while he knows only his hometown and the few countries I have taken him to. I also weigh half of his weight. At my age, he was already 40 kilograms above my weight. I am healthy while he is obese and dealing with health issues related to his weight. On the other hand, he reads more books than I do and is much more religious than I am. He is active in his church while I am not. Story 120. Yeah, but to be fair, he had just immigrated to the other side of the world with 3 children, with nothing but $2,000 and a washing machine at 32. I am 33. Story 121. Yes, but only because he died by suicide at age 39. He struggled with alcoholism and drug addiction and worked low-wage jobs until his death. By contrast, I am alive at this age. I suppose that's a win. Story 122. Emotionally, yes, but he experienced much more. Back then, it was better because people were not distracted by their phones and could actually communicate. Story 123. Well, in some cases, I am not an alcoholic. I am not married and do not have children. In the cases where he was doing well, I think he had more money and had more control over his decisions. You need ample money in this era to do better. Story 124. I am 33 years old. Both my parents were essentially disabled by my age. My father used a cane and needed various aids. Although he was technically more accomplished, he was also in a relatively similar financial situation as me. I am not disabled. In fact, I am one of the few people in my family who is not. I broke my knee at 27, and it bothers me at times, but that's the worst of it. However, I do not have any degrees or certificates. Financially, we are in comparable situations. Story 125. I have a higher salary than he had at his age and a more impressive title, though there has been inflation in titles in recent decades. At his age, he had owned a house for 10 years, while I am still renting and haven't come close to being able to buy one due to the housing market being problematic where I live. Therefore, I don't think I'm actually doing better. Story 126. I am 32, turning 33 soon. By this age, he had a house, 2 children, and vintage cars. I have not undergone therapy, so I believe I am succeeding in that aspect. Story 127. My father had a lot of anger, and he let it control him. He never asked for help or looked for ways to manage it, and I'm not sure he recognized it as a problem. This anger led him to violence, damaging our family and leaving lasting scars. I also carry that anger, but I've always sought ways to handle my temper and avoid violence. In this regard, I am light years ahead of my father at any age. Story 128. No, my dad at my age already had a girlfriend, my mom, and was traveling the world. He also owned a home and some real estate. Story 129. I am not sure how to define better. They had my sister by now, so financially it might be yes, but in terms of life achievements, probably not. He overcame many hardships growing up, whereas I thankfully had a pretty privileged upbringing. It is hard to compare, but in general, I would say no. Story 130. Define better? I would say financially I am doing better than my dad, but he would not trade his life experiences for wealth, so he would say he is doing better. Story 131. Yes and no. I have a Bachelor of Science in Applied Chemistry, and I am going back to pursue a master's degree in analytical chemistry in a couple of weeks. I will not have to be a bricklayer and risk my health to support my family. However, I am not married and do not own my home. Story 132. No, he had a house and a car and lived quite comfortably. I have ever-increasing rental costs, no car, and cannot do a big grocery shop until next month. So I am living on whatever is left. But it's my own fault because I did a Doctor of Philosophy degree, and business professionals in biotechnology have told me that education isn't important. Story 133. Yes, I own my home and have a good amount of money for my daughter to inherit. He lived in a trailer and I inherited $600 because he had taken out loans against his life insurance policies. I still despise you after all these years. Story 134. Yes, but only because my dad had more wealth at the time of his death than he did in life. Ultimately, he allowed me to be better. He was the best, and I miss him every day. I would give it all back to have him and all of his wisdom with me again. His wisdom was irreplaceable. The money was nice, but the true inheritance was him all along. Story 135. Financially, definitely not. Family-wise, it is about the same. Fitness is a tough call, but I think I have a small edge. In terms of future prospects, I believe I have an advantage. Story 136. If it weren't for the challenging economy, I could confidently say I am doing better. Unfortunately, the economy has impacted my chances of moving out while still having a little left to enjoy life at times. I am earning close to the average. It baffles me that even with this income, I am unable to afford to move out. The government has an answer for that, so who am I to question their wisdom? Story 137. No, at 26, he already has a home, children, and a high-paying job as a mechanic. I am balancing school, work, and other responsibilities. I do pay him rent, though. Story 138. My dad was in the military when he was 18 50 years ago, and I'm in college. In many ways, yes. In some others, no. Story 139. Yes and no. I am making significantly more money than my father did at my age, but he is a remarkable man. He may not have achieved great things, but his kindness, patience, and willingness to help others are qualities I aspire to emulate. Sometimes I feel I lack that trait. He has set a high standard in our community. I believe I will always be known as his child and never recognized for my own accomplishments. Story 140. Never had a father, just a series of poorly planned stepfathers. The first stepfather taught me to swear, drink, play pool, attend a rugby game, and cook a full English breakfast. The others taught me not to trust others. Story 141. Well, I am not a homeowner, a father, or a salaried employee with a steady career, but I am not going to be divorced, living in a difficult apartment, or burnt out from a job I dislike either tomorrow. Story 142. No, my dad at 18 was equivalent to a university education and had a job. I am currently unemployed and was held back a year. Story 143. No, dad was married, had 3 kids, owned a dog, a home, and drove one of his dream cars at 35. Story 144. No, sadly not. He was in the military and had his first 2 children, with a third on the way, by the time he was my age and in his first marriage. He was pretty set. Granted, I know how the story goes and he ruins everything in the end. I am just kind of jealous that he is better off in general. His parents were better off, not rich but well off. He didn't see a cent of that because of his choices. Story 145. I'm in a lower paid job, but I have a great work-life and family balance. He has 3 children while I have 1. I'm in the best shape of my life. Fitness wasn't his thing per se. He is a great man whom I love dearly, and I am very grateful for the work and sacrifices he made then and still continues to make for all of us. A true winner all around, I would say. Story 146. It depends on perspective. When he was my age, he had just moved us out of my grandparents' house into our first rental, worked decent-paying jobs, and managed to support my brother and me while my mom pursued her schooling in veterinary technology. All this happened while he struggled with a serious substance addiction. I dodged a bullet and managed not to have children yet, so I can enjoy my hobbies since there's really no urgency to support anyone besides myself. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.